Um, Philissa, you go ahead.
Sure, we can go over the basics of what happened. I just also wanted to thank everyone for coming and choosing to, spend time with JTA as we try to make sense of this challenging and surprising and difficult incident, which, I think at this point we've been through many rounds of such incidents together. And it continues to be my great honor to put out news that can help you make sense of things that sometimes just really don't make sense. So thank you for being here, Ben. I know you had wiser framing thoughts than I did, and so why don't you say a few words too, and then our plan for this time is really we'll tell you a little bit about what we know. There's some stuff that's known. There's lots that isn't. You asked really good questions. We'll try to answer as many of them as possible. And um, while we speak, our reporters are going to continue to publish stories, and we will drop them in the comments so you can see everything that we are reporting. So Ben, go ahead.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and being here with us. Thank you, Philissa, and thank you, Gabe. Um, uh, I want to mostly second what Philissa said. I know that today has felt very raw. It's a raw event. Like Philissa said, this is not the first or second or third time that we've covered this, that I've personally reported on incidents like this. It does not get any easier, and I know that it doesn't get any easier to read the news and to experience this together. So thank you for being here, and we're going to do our best to answer all your questions. I'm going to launch in a little bit um, to talk about what happened and what we know and what we don't know. I will say that Philissa more than me, were up for much of last night covering this and have kind of powered through today as well. A moment, that's right. A moment before joining this Zoom, I just finished a round of editing on a pretty long story about the security questions. So we'll answer some of those questions here as well. So I'm just going to jump in a little bit about what happened last night. Phyllis and Gabe, you can fill in gaps. And so what we know is that around 9 p.m., uh, at the tail end of an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., uh, there was a crowd of people exiting the event. It was an event for young diplomats and for Jewish communal professionals held by the American Jewish Committee. Um, and as people were exiting the event, a man approached a group of four people and opened fire, killing two of them. Um, the two people are Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, who were a young couple that were together and were reportedly about to get engaged. Both employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. The gunman then walked into the building and was there for 10 minutes. Um, then he was apprehended by police. He told them that he committed the crime, showed them where the weapon was, I believe, and shouted "Free Palestine" several times. Um, and his name, he has been a suspect has been identified as Elias Rodriguez from Chicago. He's 30 years old. Um, is there anything else, Felissa or Gabe, that you think we should be mentioning right now?
No, I mean there's lots of questions within the nooks and crannies of that story, like what kind of security there, and someone has already put in the chat again that question was asked a lot, what kind of security was there, and how did it compare to a normal event like this? Was it something out of the ordinary? Do we know?
Um, I can jump in a little bit on that. There's a lot that we personally don't know. That doesn't mean that it isn't known. I think that, the Capitol Jewish Museum hasn't really commented on the security protocols, and the AJC hasn't really gone into detail. I will say there are things that we do know, certainly. There were metal detectors at the entrance. We know that because we can see that he went through them when he came in. Um, we know that the museum had recently gotten a grant specifically for security guards, so that was very much on their agenda. We also know that as with an increasing number of Jewish events since October 7th, since the October 7th attacks more than a year and a half ago, the location of this event was hidden and only given to people who registered. So it wasn't, the location was not public. Obviously, the gunman knew about it somehow anyway. But we do know that the location wasn't public. And these are things that, again, have become more and more commonplace across Jewish events. The last thing I'll say about this is that just now, like minutes before this started, a coalition of major Jewish organizations that are tasked with security, that includes the Jewish Federations, the ADL, Secure Community Network, which is focused on institutional security at Jewish institutions across the country, and two other groups, put out a series of 5 recommendations, kind of, subsequent to this event moving forward. And those mostly have to deal with expanding the perimeter of security, right? Which means making sure that not only the building itself is secure, but the area around the building is secure. It also coordinating with law enforcement and hiring private security guards. And as this event did, keeping locations secret or at least restricted before the event. So my big, there's a lot of technical stuff in there. My big takeaway from all this, and also from interviewing people and talking to people, is that there's a recognition that something obviously went wrong here in terms of security, from security analysts that have been saying that. Something obviously went wrong. They're trying to figure out what that is and what to do about it. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, but as we know, Jewish organizations have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on security since 9/11, since the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting in 2018, especially since October 7th. And I think that kind of struggle is continuing to make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen again.
And I'll just add a few notes here. One thing you said, Ben, I don't think that we do know how the gunman came to target this event in this place. The event was being held by the American Jewish Committee, but at the Capitol Jewish Museum. We don't know if he knew in particular about this particular event whose location was only shared with registrants, or if he had come to Washington and scoped things out and saw people going into a Jewish location. We just don't know any of that at this point. I assume we will learn more as the investigation proceeds and more is shared. We don't know how long he had been in DC, for example. So there's a lot that we don't know there. And to answer the question that I saw in the comments, he did not bring a gun into the museum. So the metal detector was there and working. He discarded the gun before entering. So I think there's also, a question that I have that I know that security professionals are thinking about is how far, as far as you expand the perimeter, there's always going to be a perimeter. And is there a way to fortify totally so that someone who's determined to take aim at people who are exiting a Jewish event never can? I think that's the question that folks are grappling with right now. And we'll learn more about their ambitions and expectations in short order. I think another thing that has jumped out to me, I mean, the immediate, as social media accounts were getting posted overnight, that's when it really became clear that not only did this guy come into the building and was there for several minutes, maybe 10 minutes before being identified as the shooter, but that when he came in, there were folks who were inside who said, he came in, he seemed really stressed out. We knew something had happened outside. We gave him water. We tried to help him. And that reminded me of what happened in Colleyville when a man took 4 congregants at a synagogue hostage there in 2021, where, the door was locked. A lot of protocol was in place to make sure that people who oughtn't be there, who might be seeking to harm the community, couldn't come in. And then the door was opened because there was a desire to help someone who looked like he needed help. And our reporter actually spoke to the rabbi from Colleyville today in a story that's going to go up in just a little while. And that rabbi said, in some ways, there's some similarities, in some ways, maybe not. But I think that however you cut it, it sounds like what happened here kind of reawakens or calls attention again to the question of how do you balance being a welcoming community that feels good for people who should be there and also is protected against people who shouldn't, who may be seeking to harm it. And I think that that tension has been a very live wire in Jewish communities for a long time. I'm sure in all of your communities, you've had those conversations. And I think we'll enter another round of calibration as some new protocols get put in place or devised. How do those get implemented in a way that makes sure that Jewish communities continue to feel welcoming and accessible appropriately?
Just going off of, because Ben, it sounded like you were just talking to some security professionals. What I know, and I know Philissa just said that we don't know exactly what is going to happen now next, but are there any concrete things that you mentioned, maybe like a 5-point thing that's being distributed to Jewish communities and synagogues, and what are some of those things, or are there things that you learned that Jewish buildings, organizations are already doing in the wake of this?
Right. So yeah, thank you. It's that list that I mentioned earlier that has to do with expanding the perimeter, which, as Philissa said, comes with its own limitations, coordinating more closely with law enforcement, and making sure that the location and details of events are restricted to attendees. Those were kind of the three main buckets in that list that you mentioned that I was going over earlier. Another thing that I spoke with somebody about, somebody spoke with me about in an interview, was just this idea of being situationally aware that these Jewish security organizations have really invested in training rank and file Jewish, attendees at Jewish events, synagogue congregants or people, JCC members, things like that. And he acknowledged that that's kind of a two-sided coin, because you want to be situationally aware. You want to see if there's somebody suspicious, you want to be able to understand that and act on it. On the other hand, he said you want to be able to keep going to these events and enjoying your life. Like Philissa was saying, I think that there's always been a tension for the past couple decades as Jewish organizations have dealt with this question of how do we balance being secure and keeping everyone safe and creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere, and an atmosphere where people can feel at home, right? So I think that question persists now as well.
And I think I got this from a JTA article, and Philissa, you could drop JTA articles in the chat because you're good at doing that while we talk. Are there any elevated threats? Some people were asking about the DC area now, or is the DC area Jewish community sort of on lockdown at all right now?
I mean, I think if you have been engaged with any Jewish institution in this country today, you've probably seen heightened security that tends to get put in place whenever there's an incident or concern about one. Police in DC emphasized very clearly that they did not have concern for the safety of this community once this man was arrested, that they believe he acted alone, and that there was no further threat to the community. I think there's a concern, as there always is in situations like this, about both copycat activity and also a reckoning with what kind of, how did this person emerge and take this action in this way, and what can we learn about the climate from which he emerged that can help us understand what other threats we may face. So no acute threat that anybody, like there's no suggestion from law enforcement that there's a accomplice on the loose or anything like that, but obviously the security alert was high before this and is higher now, and I think if you'll see that this weekend, probably if you go to synagogue, if you've encountered a JCC or a Jewish day school or anything today, I'm sure you've encountered it already.
Yeah, in addition to that, messages going out from all those organizations, kind of being in touch with their constituents, their congregants about this incident.
So some people are obviously asking about the victims. Maybe we could just give a what you both know before we get into more specific questions about them.
Yeah, I think Ben shared kind of the high level. They're a young couple. Yaron is Israeli, German, made Aliyah from Germany to Israel as a teenager and studied in Israel. And this has a master's degree and a passion for diplomacy and an ambition to use diplomacy to make peace. And was working at the embassy for a couple of years already. And Sarah grew up in Kansas City, which had an anti-Semitic shooting in 2014 when I think she was in 9th grade at the time, at the JCC and Jewish Senior Center there. That was a white supremacist who came to town to and killed 3 people in 2 locations. She went to University of Kansas and then got 2 master's degrees, one at the University for Peace, operated by the United Nations, also devoted to using her background in international relations and diplomacy to make peace, worked at an organization in Israel called Tech to Peace that brought Israelis and Palestinians together to get tech training and build coexistence through high tech. The couple, right before this meeting, was following some links on the internet, was preparing to get engaged. I saw the ring. I don't know if, Ben, you've seen that yet. It's beautiful. And so they were really on the brink of, taking their relationships to the next level. Many of their friends are posting about them. I think they were very well known in the kind of DC Israel diplomacy community, which it's like a small one. And many people are very, very sad today personally, in addition to the many folks who are anxious and distressed about what this incident means. Ben, what am I missing?
I don't think you're missing anything. I had not seen the ring yet. I was forwarded, as these things go, I was forwarded a post that somebody had posted on Facebook about these people. And it reflects exactly what you said, Phyllis. It was another young person who worked in these diplomatic or activist spheres and was at an event with this couple, and they were hanging out. And I don't have it in front of me, but as I recall the story, as I read it, Yaron walked away for a minute, and then this woman asked Sarah, she was like, you're going to Israel next week. You're going to meet his family. Do you think you're going to come back with a ring? And she said, Halavai, which means in Hebrew, it's like, I hope, right? And then he came back and she posted a photo of these 4 friends hanging out, and she said, that was the last time I saw them. And it just, I think, reflects everything you said about who they were and what they were hoping to do.
So a couple of people in the chat also asked, there's no evidence that they were specifically targeted, correct? I'm sorry if I missed what you said
There
in
is
your
no specific
introduction.
evidence at present that they specifically were targeted. I don't even think that there's evidence that like Israeli diplomats in particular were targeted. I will say that there are some people who, there are some people who are like, oh, was it really an anti-Semitic shooting if it was just, targeting Israeli employees of the state of Israel? And the way a lot of people have responded to that is this was a targeting of a Jewish event at a Jewish institution. And there's no evidence that the gunman was trying to specifically get these 2 people. They just were the ones who happened to be there at that time.
Someone also asked about,
and I will just note, like, that's something that we might learn more about, right? Like we know very little about how like we don't know a lot, and I am assuming that as the investigation proceeds, more will be disclosed. And I think based on everything that police disclosed and what eyewitnesses disclosed about what happened and in the order it happened, that what Ben said is very likely to be what we learn to be true, but it's also possible that we'll learn other things.
Yeah, right. Right. We should emphasize just to reemphasize that we're, what time is it? We're less than 24, like 20 hours, 18 hours from when this happened, and what we're saying right now is all preliminary, obviously. So yeah.
To answer a question though that I did see, like, this event was not exclusively an event for people working at the embassy or for Israelis in DC. This event would have attracted people in that space, but also other American Jews working in the Jewish world who are in, and there was a specific presentation from IsraAid, which is a kind of disaster relief organization, and a discussion about humanitarian aid for Gaza and other places that need humanitarian aid. So there could be a wide array of people who would be drawn to a Jewish event in a Jewish institution on that topic. And the unit within the AGC that was hosting this was for young professionals writ large.
Just want to recap. A bunch of people are asking, for anyone who joined a little late, asking about the specifics about CCTV footage or whether the guy was pacing around, or the police don't even know everything yet. And just to recap, Ben and Philissa said that, in talking to professionals, it's clear that something went wrong in the security protocol, situation. We don't really know exactly what. Sorry that we won't be able to, answer every single detail about what went down specifically yet.
I think we can,
Yeah.
though, that the Capitol Jewish Museum, which opened 2 years ago, is an urban museum in a dense part of Washington, D.C. And it's not like a place that, would only be passed by people who are attending the event. And I think that, just like it relates to the question, the balance of being welcoming and being fortified. There's also, the balance about being, how wide do you make the perimeter, and how much are institutions integrated into the communities. And I think that it's, I have no idea, and I think we'll learn, but like I personally have been in places where someone's pacing and it seems a little weird, and I've thought about it, and I think that's a hard call about, well, do you alert authorities? Who do you alert? Whose responsibility is that? I think this was a complex environment.
And I don't know how in depth you want to go on this or how much you know, but a couple of people had also asked before about the shooter and his motivation and what we know, if he's posted things online, what kind of groups he was in. I don't know if you want to get into that.
We've published a story about that since we've been in this conversation. He is a 30-year-old guy from Chicago. This is the alleged shooter, the person that police has identified as the shooter. FBI raided or investigated his apartment in Chicago this morning. Pictures, like political posters inside the windows, and expressing a range of progressive stances, calling for a ceasefire. There was a sign that says Tikkun Olam means free Palestine. There was a sign calling attention to the 6-year-old Palestinian American boy who was murdered shortly after October 7th outside Chicago, and also signs calling attention to other issues like labor rights. The digital footprint of this guy shows a long history of kind of far left activism, including protesting against Amazon's presence in Chicago, protesting against police killing in Chicago, and participating in pro-Palestinian protests as well. Police said he did not have a record that would have made them, given them cause to have him on their radar in DC. So he'd never been in contact with DC police, and he was not in any kind of database that they would have access to from anywhere else that would have made them alarmed. So that suggests that he has not been arrested as part of his activism, but I don't know what the standards are for inclusion in those databases. This was just verified, I think, shortly before we published, but he'd set a social media account that did belong to him, so that was verified. Posted a manifesto shortly after the shooting that calls for, I'm going to get the words wrong, I'm not looking at them, but expanding, Ben, maybe do you have them handy? I don't want to get it. It's not exactly globalized.
I think it's Escalate for Palestine. Is that right?
Escalate for
I believe that's the
Palestine.
phrase, which is a pretty common phrase, not to interrupt you, pretty common phrase among the more hardline pro-Palestinian groups that have.
So like globalized intifada, but not that. And also kind of made the case for armed resistance and explored slightly why that might seem like people might have questions about it, but how he had come to the conclusion that it was justified, and said, 11 years ago, so that was during the 2014 Gaza war, the manifesto said that was when he first became acutely aware of, I think it said, our brutality in Palestine. I think that's what the words were. And that at that time, such an action like the one that he is alleged to have taken last night would have not made sense, but that he thought that things had changed in America, and that people would view his action now as intelligible, understandable, and maybe sane. So
I just want to jump in for 1 second.
Yeah,
I looked it up because I want to be able to quote things accurately here. The title of the manifesto, as he put it on X, on Twitter, was Escalate for Gaza, Bring the War Home. So it's not what I said earlier. It's slightly different. It's Escalate for Gaza, Bring the War Home. So just
the meaning is the same. It's to expand the front and take action. And I was particularly struck by those sentences saying, that things had changed in the last decade, and that he thought that people would understand what he had done and support it. And I will say, look, the comment section on the internet in all places is they're very dark places. I was reading the comments on a Twitter post about, or maybe Instagram, Block Club Chicago, which is a local nonprofit news organization covering Chicago, a straight down the middle, independent nonprofit news organization, just posted a straight story describing the FBI raid on his apartment, and the comments were, many of them were in his defense, and someone who stepped in to say, like, guys, like, I'm with you on Palestine, on Gaza, but like, stop, because you're saying you're supporting an anti-Semitic murder, like, that doesn't help the cause, was really eaten alive. And so I think that that's a real dynamic that's out there. Ben, maybe you can talk about that for a minute, because you did a story already today about exactly those folks on the internet.
Yeah, and this is just an illustration of how fast things are moving and changing in what we know and what we don't know, because I want to emphasize that again. When I wrote this story, that post either had not been up yet, or was just kind of germinating. And so I wrote a news article earlier today about people who are justifying the attack, celebrating the murder, celebrating the attacker, right? Or saying it wasn't anti-Semitic, or things like that. And Philissa and I, when we were talking as we were doing the initial coverage last night, that's when we started talking about this, because within minutes after Yaron's name trickled out, and it wasn't even verified. It wasn't even at a point where we could put it in our article because we weren't sure yet. But as soon as his name started trickling out, there was a post saying, using a four-letter word about him that I'm not going to repeat here, and explicitly justifying his murder and his and Sarah Milgram's murder as well. And that's something that I kept seeing over and over again. And there, people made people who were doing this made an explicit connection to Luigi Mangione, the person who is accused of killing the United Healthcare CEO. And there's a movement around him kind of justifying that act and supporting him. And I think we're seeing a similar thing happen in some corners with the suspect here as well. There was a cryptocurrency that came up to support him, named after him, like a meme coin for those who are familiar with that. And yeah, we're definitely seeing, again, in some corners of the internet and social media, we're seeing that impulse. I just want to note that among a lot of people, even people who are vocal critics of Israel, vocal supporters of vocal pro-Palestinian activists or politicians, they have condemned this. So AOC, who might be the most famous one, put out a statement saying, anti-Semitism has no place. This is horrifying. These people, innocents should never be killed. Zohran Mamdani, for people in New York, who's running for mayor and polling second in the mayoral race, and is by no means a supporter of Israel, tweeted a similar statement out. Rashida Tlaib tweeted a similar statement out.
Jewish Voice for Peace, right?
Jewish Voice for Peace as well, which is an anti-Zionist Jewish organization, right? And I saw that somebody mentioned Brandon Johnson, who's the mayor of Chicago, who let's say he's deeply unpopular in general, and is particularly among the Jewish community. He Many view him as anti-Semitic, certainly anti-Israel. He once refused to call an attack on a Jewish man walking to synagogue anti-Semitic. There's several other things. Today, he did call this anti-Semitic. So I saw somebody asked about him, so I wanted to answer that. So there are, just to kind of recap, there are certain fringes that are celebrating the attack. But I think even when you talk about elected officials who many people see as pretty virulently anti-Israel, a lot of them are condemning this as anti-Semitic. Yeah.
And so you two, the whole JTA team has been following, since October 7th for years before, the way that attacks like this, like what their impacts are. And I'm so curious what I know you're both sticking to the facts right now, but I'm so curious to hear if you like your predictions about how this plays out. If it really goes the Luigi Mangione route, if it like actually causes some fracturing in the pro-Palestinian movement, if it enrages the Israeli right even more. Like, I'm so curious how you think this spins out, because obviously we don't know, and we only know the facts that you talked about. But like, what you've had, you had years of covering things that are not exactly this and not exactly this climate. But I'd be just really curious to hear your first predictions.
I mean, I think with the Luigi Mangione case, like, it's important to note that while he continues to be a meme and continues to have some supporters who think what he did was heroic, he is in jail and is gonna stay there and is being prosecuted under, according to the laws of the land, fully.
Quite emphatically, in fact.
Yes. And I think that we will see that here too. So I can predict with reasonable confidence that there will be a retraining of security at the Capitol Jewish Museum. That will be watched closely by Jewish institutions across the United States and beyond, who have put in place protocol after protocol and done trainings, but then time passes and it's a good time to shore up processes. So I think that we will absolutely see that. I think there's been many questions in the comment section about what went wrong. And I think we can all see that both that we're hearing from security professionals that something went wrong and just looking at it like obviously something went wrong. So, I think we'll learn from this. We will have a story about, I think when I can talk about some of the questions that we're looking at. I think Gabe, you pointed to one of them, which is like, is there going to be an internal conversation within the pro-Palestinian movement about language and tactics and guardrails such that, to create guardrails so that people like this man who may absorb what they hear in the environment and go and take particular actions that they are taking on their own, as far as we know. So that would be less likely to happen. I think that, we're interested to see whether that conversation happens internally. I think it's pretty clear there's also a lot of pressure. That's going to be a hard conversation for the movement to have. There's a lot of pressure against it as well. And I think another thing that we've been watching in the United States is about the government's use of its power to tamp down on protests, on expressions of support for various political positions, including, pro-Palestinian positions. And as this was all playing out today, the Trump administration made I don't even, we have a story coming about this too. I don't even totally understand it, but a decree that Harvard, which it's battling ostensibly over these issues, can no longer enroll foreign students, and foreign students who are enrolled will have to transfer out. I mean, I don't even know if anything of what I said is exactly what has happened, but something major
I've
is
seen
happening.
that in headlines. So
Right. So something major is happening there, and that represents a striking use of federal power to shape, quash or shape conversation. So I think we can definitely be looking for whether there is an effect from this incident on the direction the Trump administration is going with its prosecutions of, or efforts to deport pro-Palestinian non-citizen protesters. The person that we're talking about here is a citizen, and nothing we've heard yet from the Attorney General. Everything we heard so far is very in line with what you would expect to hear in a case like this. So if there's a departure, we're yet to see it. Ben, what else am I leaving out?
So I think you're right that in the United States, all the statements and everything have been pretty de rigueur, and what you would expect basically from any administration in terms of prosecuting to the full extent of the law and condemning anti-Semitism. I want to say two things. One small thing, I think somebody in the comments talked about, I hope the feds take the case. The FBI is investigating linkages to terrorism, hate crimes, all that stuff. So the FBI is certainly involved in the case on that front. More broadly, in America, I think all the kind of political and discourse questions that Philissa raised are the ones that are happening right now. In Israel, there's a slightly different conversation which is the next thing on my agenda to work on after this call, actually, where there's a whole other kind of discourse happening. I don't want to get too long-winded about it. As we know, the war against Hamas in Gaza has gone on for 19 months, almost 20. And the majority of Israelis wanted to end with a hostage deal. Netanyahu, the prime minister, does not want to do that. He wants to defeat Hamas completely, as he says. There's also obviously a debate for those who have been following the news. There's a debate about Israel letting humanitarian aid into Gaza and fears of starvation there. And I say all that to say that a left-wing Israeli politician, Yair Golan, who was also a major general in the army and fought on October 7th, said in an interview recently, he said that a sane country doesn't kill children as a hobby. That was the quote, and that sparked a big controversy in Israel. He stood by what he was saying. He said, we need to end the war, and suffering has gone on too long, and you should go to JTA for our coverage. I don't want to rehash the whole thing. But after his initial statement was condemned by the prime minister, by the president, who was in a apolitical position or supposed to be in a apolitical position, and Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, is by no means a right winger. He came from the centrist left wing of Israel. He also condemned it. And then this shooting happened, and specifically on the right and within Israel's right wing government, a lot of people are trying to place the blame on Yair Golan, on this left wing politician, for what he said. I hope that wasn't too confusing, but basically a lot of discourse in Israel on the right is blaming a left wing politician for criticizing the conduct of the war and saying that fomented the conditions for this. Um, so, so that's kind of what's happening in the Israeli discourse. I will also say that Netanyahu came out with a statement not too long ago that mourned the deaths of the embassy staffers, who were, of course, Israeli government employees, um, and and um, and uh, castigated the phrase "Free Palestine," which the attacker, shouted after committing the attack. And then Netanyahu kind of pivoted to restating what his policy was, which is to continue the war and actually to escalate and expand the military operation in Gaza. I'll just say that that's also what he said before the attack. So at least in the immediate term, it doesn't seem like this is like leading to a huge change in Israeli strategy in Gaza or the West Bank or anything like that. It is leading to a rhetorical war among Israeli politicians in Knesset, which, of course, that's not the first time that's happened either. So that's what's kind of happening on that end, on one
Right.
front.
It'll be interesting to see if actually not much changes at all. On the other hand, if everyone just kind of hardens in their own positions.
Mhm.
Someone asked, I think in the chat actually, and I think before the event too, what should I, asking like a personal question, this is maybe not the most journalistic question, but someone who has a Jewish event on their calendar next week, what are some, you're as good as people to ask as any, because you're constantly talking to Jewish security people. What could someone do with just the internet to make themselves feel a little more prepared to go to something like this event last night?
So I'm going to just preface by saying that we are not security experts. I've done a bunch of reporting. Felissa's done a bunch of reporting on Jewish security. I talk to these people a lot, but I am not them, and I don't think it's my place or our place necessarily to tell you what to do and what not to do. I'll just say kind of two really high level, like broad things that appear here a lot, which is number one, all these people say like don't stop going to events. That's not like, I think everyone who's securing the events and whatever is invested in Jewish life happening in America. So that's what they all say. And the second thing about what you can do personally, I think that's a personal decision. I hate to kind of restate the question and the answer, but every organization has a leader and somebody who's thinking about this, and that's probably the best person to talk to about what's in place and how you should be feeling about any specific event you go to. Philissa, I want to kick it over to you for that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think we all as people have probably run through scenarios in our heads about, what we would do in particular moments or what we're looking for. And I think, as Ben said earlier, like the experts say that's very important actually to have an awareness of where you are and what's around you and some thoughts in your mind about how to handle a crisis if it emerges, and also to I think they would say, Ben, it's like don't expect the crisis, plan for the crisis, but don't expect the crisis. Continue to engage with Jewish life. But I think that running of scenarios, which can sometimes feel it doesn't feel great, is actually part of what the security professionals say is important to be prepared.
So I think you guys did a great job of covering all that I could put together from the chat and from the questions submitted before, and you've been up all night, so maybe we'll give you guys a break. Is there anything else we missed that you think you wanted, any reporting you wanted to highlight or anything?
And one thing that's popping out to me just looking at the discussion in our chat here, but also knowing what the conversation is in the world is, 24 hours ago, there was a very robust internal Jewish conversation that was developing much more than it had, about this, how the war should go going forward, what Israel should be doing vis-a-vis humanitarian aid to Gaza. That conversation was changing. And I think a question going forward is, how can we have our internal, and this is always the question, right? Like how can Jews discuss important issues for the Jews, and not work and be able to do that knowing that we're going to be overheard, that whatever we say counts, and that people who are less informed than we are having their own conversation about the same stuff. And I think it'll just be interesting to see what the effect of this incident was. We're in a time where things move very, very quickly, and I think it's a little different from, I was looking back at our coverage of the Kansas City attack, which was not so dissimilar in terms of scope, and we covered it. There wasn't that much else going on. I mean, I don't know, like it felt different. And I think news moves really quickly, the conversation moves really quickly, and I'm just really interested to know what shape internal communal Jewish conversations about all kinds of pressing issues, including security, including the war, including our responsibilities to others, all of that take shape going forward.
I do want to say I saw one person early in the chat say, I hope you guys get some sleep. Just going to relate to that for a second. Probably not, but Shabbat is coming in a couple days.
I was going to say, see
So
it coming.
So we'll have that, but really appreciate everyone getting on this, and it's good to be able to smile a little bit today. And what has obviously been a very difficult day for the Jewish community, for Israel, for American Jews, for a lot of people. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gabe, for moderating. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
One last thing I'll say is that, you were so helpful actually in just sharing all of your questions. And that has really informed our decision making about what to cover throughout the day and going forward. And like, we don't have to be having an event for you to tell us what you are curious about. And if we need to build a better structure for you to be able to do that all the time, we will. But you can also like respond to our daily email every single day and say, this is what I really want to know. And that will get read and discussed in our team. And your questions really, really inform our work.
What's a good, by the way, the best is the tips email still something that is regularly checked?
We read tips. If you
Okay.
reply to the newsletter, you'll end up in the news desk email. We read it all. And we don't always respond immediately to everything, but we read everything and take it really seriously.
And if by some stretch you came to this event but do not get our daily email, there is a handy subscribe button on the top right of our homepage. It says subscribe, and it's got a little
And
envelope.
Gabe's going to drop it right now too, I bet.
Great. So you should subscribe. And I also want to say, Philissa and I are on this call. We're obviously working as hard as we can. We are working with an amazing team with us, a team of reporters and a team of a much larger team at JTA and 70 Faces Media that is supporting us. So I just want to shout out all of them. I'm not going to name every single one, mostly because I'm very sleep deprived and will probably forget somebody. But I just want to say thank you to our incredible team. You'll see not just our bylines, obviously, but all of our reporters' bylines. Everyone is on the ground today, working as hard as they can to get this story out in all the ways that it gets out. So I just want to thank you. Yeah.
I was gonna say we might. I don't. We know. We don't. We know a handful of facts, but something I do know is that any question, as the news it comes out, you will find it on JTA. These guys are the best of the best. They're not holding anything back. Everything that, any piece of information that I've learned from reading JTA articles. And so keep up with them. They're going to keep at it. That's something we do know. And thank you both for the work that you're doing.
Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.